The fluorescent strip light above Audrey's desk had been flickering for 11 minutes. She had counted. She counted everything: invoices, decimal points, the number of steps between her office and the fire exit on the 4th floor of the building on King Street West. It was a habit she couldn't switch off, the way some people couldn't stop checking the locks. Numbers felt honest. Honest things were rare. The man sitting in the leather chair across from her was not honest. He had introduced himself as a business liaison for Northline Distribution, one of her firm's largest accounts, and then he had set a single sheet of paper on her desk. It was a printout of a wire transfer, $847,000 Canadian, routed through 3 shell companies, all of which were registered under the business number of Farrow Accounting Solutions. Her business number, her CRA registration, her name at the bottom of every document. "We appreciate your discretion up to this point," the man said. He had small, damp eyes and a wedding ring that sat too tight on his finger. "We just need that discretion to continue." Audrey had not touched the paper. Her hands were folded in her lap under the desk, where he couldn't see them shaking. "I don't work for Northline," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I've never invoiced Northline. I've never signed anything for Northline." "Your former partner did." The man smiled. It didn't reach the damp eyes. "Curtis Hale. He had signing authority for your firm for 14 months. He was very cooperative." Curtis. She should have changed the registration the week he walked out. She should have revoked everything the same afternoon. She found the locks changed on the apartment they had shared in Leslieville. Instead, she had given herself a week to grieve something that had turned out not to have been worth grieving. And in that week, Curtis had apparently handed the bones of everything she had built to people who moved dirty money through legitimate accounting firms. The man stood up. He was not tall, but he filled the room in the particular way that men with violent intentions fill rooms. "We'll be in touch about next quarter's filings," he said pleasantly. "Don't make any calls you'll regret." He left. The door clicked shut with a sound that felt surgical. Audrey sat perfectly still for 90 seconds. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked down at King Street. A black sedan was idling in a no-stopping zone directly in front of the building. The passenger window was cracked 2 inches. Someone was watching the entrance. She turned away from the glass. She could not go to the CRA. The documents he had shown her were thorough and deeply implicating. A forensic auditor, which she happened to be, would have no trouble reconstructing a case against Farrow Accounting Solutions from the paperwork trail Curtis had left. She could not go to the police for the same reason. Whatever Curtis had signed on her behalf, the signature was legally hers. She had one option. She hated that she had one option. She went to the washroom at the end of the hall, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the cold ceramic sink. She pulled out her phone. The contact was saved under a string of dashes. No name, no profile photo, just 10 digits she had memorized 2 years ago and tried, without success, to forget. 2 years ago, she had been doing a routine audit for a real estate holding company when she found a layered discrepancy so precise and so deliberate that it had taken her breath away. Whoever had structured it had known exactly what they were doing. She had pulled the thread and followed it back to its source over the course of 11 days, working after hours in her apartment with her laptop and a pot of coffee going cold on the counter. The source was a man who controlled the movement of money through half the commercial docks in the Greater Toronto area. His name was Brask. He had come to her apartment himself. She would never forget the knock. 3 times, evenly spaced, unhurried. She had opened the door expecting a courier. She had found a man in a dark coat who looked at her the way actuaries look at risk tables, calm, calculating, profoundly certain of his own conclusions. The scar along the left side of his jaw caught the hallway light. His eyes did not. "You found something," he had said, not a question. She hadn't confirmed or denied. She had stepped back from the door because there had been no point in trying to close it. He had sat down at her kitchen table and looked at the open laptop. He had looked at the stack of printed statements she had been annotating in red pen. He had looked at her. "You didn't go to the revenue agency," he said. "I hadn't decided yet. You'd been sitting on it for 11 days. He picked up one of the printed sheets, studied it briefly, set it back down. "If you were going to report it, you'd have done it by day 3. She had hated that he was right. He had made her an offer, not a threat. That was the part she still turned over in her mind sometimes, the part that unsettled her more than a threat would have. He had simply told her what he knew, what she had found, and what her options were. He had laid it out the way she would have laid out a balance sheet. Clean columns, no emotion. At the end he had slid a card across her kitchen table. "If someone ever uses your skills against you," he had said, "use this number once." She had taken it. She had told herself it was evidence. She had known, even then, that it wasn't. Now she stared at the contact in her phone. She thought about the black sedan on King Street. She thought about $847,000 routed through her registration and the man with the damp eyes saying next quarter's filings. She thought about what it would mean to try to handle this herself. She was good at numbers. She was not good at this. She pressed call. It rang twice. Then a voice, low, unhurried, waited with the patience of a man who was never surprised, said, "You've been sitting on it for 11 days again." She swallowed. 40 minutes, she said. "He just left my office 40 minutes ago." A short silence, not hesitation assessment. "Is anyone in the building with you?" "I'm in the 4th floor washroom." "Don't leave it. Don't use the main elevator." A pause. She heard the distant sound of a chair moving, a drawer opening. 20 minutes. He ended the call before she could reply. She sat on the edge of the sink and counted the tiles on the floor. There were 48 full tiles and a partial row along the baseboard. The grout was newer than the tiles. Someone had regrouted in the last 3 years. She noticed things like that when her brain had nowhere useful to go. Brask arrived in 19 minutes. She heard him before she saw him, not his footsteps, which were silent, but the quality of silence that spread from wherever he was standing, the way certain presences rearranged the air in a corridor. She unlocked the washroom door and found him in the hallway, wearing a charcoal coat over a dark shirt. No tie, no visible urgency despite the hour. Beside him stood a man she didn't recognize, broad, quiet, with the deliberate stillness of someone who had spent years learning how not to be noticed. Brask looked at her the way he had looked at her 2 years ago, thorough and without sentiment. His eyes moved over her, checking, cataloguing, and then settled on her face. "You're not hurt," he said. "Not yet." "Walk me through it, concise." She told him. Standing in the hallway outside the washroom in a low and even voice, she laid it out the same way she would present findings to a client. The Northline account she had never touched, the wire transfers, her CRA registration, Curtis, the man with the damp eyes, the paper on her desk. When she finished, Brask was looking at a fixed point on the wall above her shoulder. "Lev," he said. The man beside him moved immediately, heading for the stairwell without a word. "The sedan on King Street." Audrey watched him go. "What does that mean?" "It means the sedan will not be on King Street when we leave." Brask turned back to her. "Come downstairs." She followed him because she did not have a better option, and because standing alone in the hallway wasn't one either. The rear door of a dark Mercedes was already open when they reached the street. The sedan that had been watching the building was gone. She didn't ask what handled meant. She got in the car and watched the city roll past the tinted windows. The late-night lights of downtown Toronto, the lake a dark absence to the south. Brask sat across from her, reading something on his phone, giving her the particular privacy that comes from being deliberately ignored. She watched the city and thought about Curtis. They had been over for 8 months. She had told herself she was past it. She had thrown herself into building the client base of Farrow Accounting Solutions. She had taken on 3 new contracts. She had started running mornings along the waterfront. She had constructed a life so deliberately busy that there was no room in it for the specific exhaustion, that comes from trusting someone completely and being shown, in a single afternoon, that you were the only one who had done the trusting. She had thought the worst of it was over. The car stopped in the underground garage of a building she recognized by its bones, though she had never been inside, a converted warehouse on the western edge of the waterfront district. The elevator required a key card Brask produced from his coat pocket without ceremony. The penthouse was exactly what she would have predicted, and nothing at all like she expected. There was money everywhere, in the way money looks when it has stopped trying to prove itself. Clean lines, expensive materials, nothing decorative for the sake of it. A wall of windows faced the lake. The city was a circuit board below them, and the lake beyond was black and patient. A woman appeared from a side hallway, mid-50s, no expression, carrying a medical bag. Audrey stopped. "I'm not injured." "You're in shock," Brask said, not turning around. He was already at the bar along the far wall. "Dr. Pelletier looks at everyone who comes through this door." Pelletier examined her with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long stopped being surprised by the condition people arrived in. Blood pressure, pupils, a question about when she had last eaten. 4 hours ago, Audrey said. A granola bar between client appointments. Pelletier made a sound that communicated professional disapproval and packed her bag. Mild shock elevated cortisol, Pelletier said to Brask. "Feed her something real." "Thank you, doctor." Pelletier left. Brask set a glass of water and a plate on the low table near the couch. Toast, plain, bread and butter. The ordinariness of it disarmed her more than anything else had. She sat. She drank the water. She did not touch the toast. "You said you know who Curtis is," she said. "I said I had him audited. Those aren't the same thing." "You knew he was still listed as a signing authority on my firm." "I knew it 8 months ago, when you ended the relationship and didn't remove him." He sat down in the chair across from her, leaning forward on his elbows. "I expected you to correct it." She absorbed that. "You were watching." "I keep an eye on things in my orbit." He said it without apology. "You're in my orbit, Audrey. You have been since the night you pulled 11 days of audit work on my holding company and sat on it." He reached for a folder from the side table, thick manila, the kind she associated with due diligence packages, and held it out. Curtis didn't stumble into Northline distribution. He sought them out. She took the folder. She opened it because she was the kind of person who always opened the folder. Inside were bank records, email threads, a photograph of Curtis shaking hands with a man she didn't recognize outside a restaurant in Mississauga. The date stamp on the photograph was 14 months ago, 5 months before he walked out of their apartment. She had thought he left because they had grown apart, the usual slow dissolve of something that had started with intention and ended with silence. She had analyzed it the way she analyzed everything, looking for the inflection point, the quarter where the numbers changed. She turned the page. A signed agreement, Curtis's signature, not hers, but the firm's registered letterhead, her business number, establishing Farrow Accounting Solutions as the accounting firm of record for 3 companies she had never heard of, all 3 registered in the same 48-hour window, 6 weeks before he left. He had been setting it up before he left. She put the folder down. "He didn't leave because we stopped working," she said. Her voice was level, professionally level, the way she went professionally level when she was reading a particularly damaging set of accounts. "He left because he was done needing the access." "Yes. He was going to let me take the liability. When the CRA eventually opened an inquiry, and you'd have had no knowledge of the transactions and no plausible defense against the paperwork trail he left. Hale would have been in another province before the first letter arrived." Brask's voice was clinical, surgical. "The man who visited you tonight was insurance. They wanted to confirm you were compliant before the next round of transfers." Audrey looked at the lake. A cargo ship's lights were moving slowly across the darkness. She had spent 2 years building something. Up at 5:30 in the morning, 2 years straight. She had earned every single client by knowing the work better than anyone else in the room. She had fixed the books for small business owners who couldn't afford mistakes and mid-size companies whose previous accountants had been sloppy. She had been meticulous and honest because she had decided a long time ago that those were the two things she had absolute control over. Curtis had walked into a meeting she hadn't been invited to and used her meticulousness as a tool. Something moved in her chest, not grief, not the hollow, aching thing from 8 months ago. This was different. This was the particular cold fury of a person who has been underestimated by exactly the wrong individual. "What do you want?" she said. Brask tilted his head slightly. "Clarify. You came when I called. You had the sedan handled. You have a folder." She looked at him directly. "You don't do things without a ledger, Brask. What's on your side of it?" A long silence. He studied her the way he had studied her in her kitchen 2 years ago. Methodical, unhurried, and without the performance of patience. "Northline Distribution launders money for a man named Garrett Sion," he said. "Sion is expanding into the port of Toronto." A pause. "My port. He's been burning through small accounting firms as fronts. Farrow Accounting Solutions is the 4th in 18 months. The other 3 are no longer operational." She knew what no longer operational meant in this context. She let it sit. What happened to Curtis? Curtis was located at 11:52 tonight. He's being held south of the city. He held her gaze. Alive, that determination is not urgent. She breathed through it. She was not going to perform grief for a man who had handed her firm over to people who would have let her go to prison for it. "You need the account trail," she said. "I need someone who can reconstruct it cleanly enough to be actionable." He leaned back. "Sion's people are thorough, but they work with accountants who know money, not forensic auditors who know evidence. There is a meaningful difference. You want me to map the full network, every shell, every transfer, every registration, in a format that accomplishes 2 things. First, dismantle Sion's paper infrastructure permanently. The transfers stop and he cannot rebuild the trail." He paused. "Second, a package that goes to the CRA on a timeline I control, naming every signatory except one. Except me. Farrow Accounting Solutions has no knowledge of transactions conducted without the principal's authorization and consent." He said it the way she would have written it. Clean. Defensible. Factually accurate. Curtis Hale, operating with fraudulently retained signing authority, is the sole responsible party. You've already drafted the narrative. I drafted the structure. You'd write the documentation. You're better at it than anyone on my payroll. He said it without flattery. Plain statement. Take it or leave it. She stood up and walked to the window. Toronto's lights were steady and indifferent below her. She thought about the CRA inquiry that was already in motion the moment Sione's people used her registration. She thought about explaining to clients she had worked for years that their accountant was under investigation. She thought about starting over in a smaller city with a smaller practice, and the particular shame of having let this happen to something she had built with her own hands. She thought about sitting on the edge of a washroom sink, counting floor tiles, waiting to see if a number she had held for 2 years would still connect. She turned from the window. I want 2 things. Brask waited. The documentation on Curtis. Everything you have. She kept her voice steady. If he's being named as the sole responsible party, I'm the one who builds that case. Not handed a narrative I had no part in constructing. My methodology, my documentation standards, my work product. And the second. When this is done, I want the fraudulent signing authority corrected in a way that is legally permanent. A formal opinion on record. Not just removed from the registry, documented as fraudulently retained, so that no one can revisit it in 5 years when it's convenient for someone. He considered this for 4 seconds. She counted. Done. She crossed the room and held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, the same brief, assessing look he gave everything, then stood and shook it. Once firm, no performance. His hand was warm. The calluses on his palm told a history that his suit and his penthouse were not designed to advertise. "I'll need a secure workspace," she said. "My firm's system is compromised." "You'll have access to a clean network in the morning." He walked to the bar, poured a second glass of water, set it on the counter. "The guest room is at the end of the East Hall." She stopped. "I didn't agree to stay here." Lev ran the plate on the sedan. "It's registered to a numbered company that ties to Sione's secondary holding entity." He looked at her across the room. "They know what building you're in. They don't know what building I'm in." She considered arguing. She considered the plate, the numbered company, the fact that Sione's people had demonstrated all evening that they knew precisely where she was. She considered 48 washroom tiles. "One condition," she said. He waited. "I'm not here as a guest. I'm not here because you're protecting me." She watched his face. "I'm here because I am the most useful forensic auditor you have access to, and we have a shared problem. That is the arrangement. Nothing else." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement of something that had been offered straight and received straight, without ornamentation. "That's the arrangement," he said. She was in the East Hall guest room at 2:15 in the morning when she heard movement in the corridor. Lev's deliberate footsteps, then a low exchange of voices outside Brask's office at the other end of the hall. She lay still and listened to the shape of the conversation without catching the words, the way she listened to figures before she understood what they meant. The footsteps returned, a knock at her door. She sat up. "Come in." Lev opened the door. He looked at her with the same economy of expression he applied to everything. "Sione's people came back to your building 20 minutes ago. 3 of them. They went up to the 4th floor." She felt the cold move through her office, her files, her client records. "The server," she said. "Encrypted and off-site. We pulled the backup at midnight." Lev glanced toward the hallway. "Brask wants you in the study." She got up. She pulled on her jacket, smoothed her hair back, and walked down the hall with the particular posture of someone who has decided not to run from something. Brask was standing at his desk when she came in, a phone to his ear. He looked at her and held up a single finger. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. A laptop was already open in front of her. The screen showed a directory of files, a folder structure she recognized immediately as account records, the Northline files. 3 years of transactions, organized by entity. Brask ended the call. "Sione knows you called someone tonight. He doesn't know who. He'll find out." "Yes." Brask sat down across from her. "He'll find out by morning that you're under this roof. After that he has 2 choices, negotiate or escalate." His eyes moved to the open laptop. "Either way, I'd prefer to be holding the documentation when he makes that call." Audrey looked at the screen. 3 years of layered transfers, shell registrations, nominee directors, all of it threaded through small accounting firms that had been chosen precisely because they were small enough to be pressured and legitimate enough to provide cover. It was, she had to admit, a beautifully constructed structure, complicated enough to be opaque, simple enough to be maintained. She could take it apart in 72 hours. She pulled the laptop toward her. "I'll need coffee," she said. Brask reached across the desk and pressed a button on a small panel she hadn't noticed. Lev. A beat, yeah. Espresso. She was already reading. The numbers opened up in front of her the way numbers always did. First as noise, then as pattern, then as a story that someone had worked very hard to make unreadable. She had been making unreadable things readable for 6 years. She had done it for clients who needed the truth about their own finances, and for regulators who needed the truth about other people's. She had done it alone, in her apartment, at her own desk, with her name on the door of a firm she had built from nothing. She was going to do it one more time, in a stranger's penthouse, at a desk that wasn't hers, for reasons that were more complicated than any engagement letter she had ever signed. But the work was the same. The numbers were the same, and the story they were hiding was going to be exactly as readable as every other story she had ever found. She turned to Brask. He was watching her with the expression she had come to recognize in the last 2 hours, calculating, quiet, already 3 steps ahead of the current moment. "When Sion calls," she said, "what do you want him to find?" Brask looked at the open laptop, then at her. The desk lamp caught the scar along his jaw. "A woman who disappeared," he said, "and a problem he cannot balance." Audrey turned back to the screen. She started with the first transfer. She would find the thread, and she would pull it, the same way she had pulled every thread before this one, all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to wherever Curtis's name appeared for the last time. The espresso arrived. The rain started against the penthouse windows, steady and patient. She did not look up from the numbers again.